CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. A bid to resolve conflicts over competition. The US Commerce Secretary arrives in Beijing as trade tensions boil. 3 US Marines killed and 5 others injured as their aircraft crashes during military exercises off the coast of northern Australia. It's over. Football teams and fans show support for Spain's Jenny Hermoso as the Football Association calls an urgent meeting over Luis Rubiales' behaviour. And 8 gold medals up for grabs on the final day of the World Athletics Championships in Budapest, bringing the curtain down on a sporting spectacle. The United States Commerce Secretary is beginning a 4-day visit to China, aiming to boost business ties between the world's 2 largest economies. Gina Raimondo arrived in the capital, Beijing, and is also expected to travel to Shanghai. Moves by Washington to protect its chip industry and an ongoing debate over Western countries de-risking from Beijing have increased trade tensions. Yawei Liu is a senior advisor on China at the Carter Center and adjunct professor of political science at Emory University. He told me what's at stake for this trip.
Just like the previous visit by Secretary Blinken, by Janet Yellen, as well as by Senator Kerry, first expectation is top Chinese leaders, including Xi Jinping, Li Qiang, and He Lifeng, will come out and meet with her. My second expectation is that the Chinese leaders will complain ferociously about Americans' initial decoupling and now what we call de-risking effort to contain China. And she certainly will try her best to explain. I think the Chinese leaders also should make it clear to her that China remains open for global investment and trade. And finally, Gina Raimondo is going to visit Shanghai. I think her message to the businesses, particularly American business in Shanghai, that is, they should try to do their best not to decouple with China.
What do you make of the timing of her visit to China?
The timing is very interesting. This is right after the BRICS. BRICS certainly shows to the world that developing countries, emerging economies are trying to form their own bloc. And then G20 is around the corner in September, whether President Xi and President Biden are going to meet in Delhi. And thirdly, of course, is the APEC meeting in November in San Francisco. That's what all eyes are on, is if Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has the part of the mission is to negotiate the terms of the summit in San Francisco.
And there's been the suggestion from the United States that this visit will help stop competition from tipping into conflict. Can this visit do that?
I'm not sure this visit can do that, but certainly it shows a pattern from the USA, to erect the so-called guardrails to prevent this from going in. But the thing is, every time something good happens and then something bad will happen subsequently. For example, the investment order, from Biden to restrict American investment in high-tech area. That happened right after Janet Yellen's visit. So I hope, nothing like that is going to happen after this visit, because anything like that will be interpreted by the China side as, you have talk in one way but act in another way.
3 US Marines have been killed after a military aircraft crashed during a multi-nation training exercise in Australia. The Northern Territory's largest hospital activated an emergency Code Brown alert, the highest level for an Australian public hospital, to help respond to the crash. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall reports.
The crash happened off the coast of northern Australia. 5 of the injured are said to be in a serious condition, with 1 critical. They were flown to the mainland city of Darwin for hospital treatment. Helicopters were also deployed to return from the remote location with the rest of the injured.
This morning, 2 US Marine Osprey aircraft left Darwin and flew to the Tiwi Islands, 80 kilometres to the north of Darwin. After 9 a.m, our Joint Communications Centre received reports of an aircraft crashing on Melville Island, around 2 kilometres inland near Pico Taramal. This aircraft was confirmed as a US Marine Osprey.
The aircraft was being used during the multilateral exercise Predators run, involving 2,500 troops from the US, Australia, the Philippines, East Timor and Indonesia. The exercise has been paused. Australia's Prime Minister says the incident is tragic.
Our focus as a government and as the Department of Defence is very much on incident response and on making sure that every support and assistance is given at this difficult time.
The cause of the crash remains under investigation. It is the second fatal accident involving aircraft and joint training between the United States and Australia this year. 4 Australian pilots were killed last month when their helicopter crashed into the sea off the coast of Queensland. Siobhan McCall, CGTN.
Russia says genetic testing has confirmed that Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin died in Wednesday's plane crash north of Moscow. Investigators say they've identified all 10 bodies on board and they match the passenger list for the flight. The private plane crashed 2 months after Prigozhin's short-lived rebellion against Russia's military leaders. The Kremlin has denied allegations it was behind the crash. One of Ukraine's most celebrated fighter pilots has been killed in a mid-air crash along with 2 other airmen. The collision happened during a training exercise over a region west of Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky paid tribute to Andrei Pilshchikov, who had ambitions to fly F-16 jets. Ukraine is counting on the planes, promised by Western allies, to step up its military capabilities. Spanish football federations launched an internal investigation and will hold an urgent meeting on Monday over the Women's World Cup final kiss incident involving its president, Luis Rubiales. Rubiales has been suspended by World Football governing body FIFA for 3 months, pending an investigation. He kissed player Jenny Hermoso on the mouth during a medal presentation in Sydney last Sunday. She says she did not consent to it. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports from Madrid.
Despite the deafening calls for him to step down, despite being suspended by FIFA, despite some of his closest allies jumping ship, Rubiales is holding on and says that he will fight to the end. Right now he's in Motril, his hometown in Granada in the south of Spain. He went there, he said, to disconnect and to be with family, but he can't get away from the noise. Today there was supposed to be a match, a football match organised by 3 local clubs in Granada called Amigos de Rubiales, or Friends of Rubiales. When the local feminist platform heard about this, they called for a huge protest outside the stadium. And when Town Hall got wind of that, they cancelled the entire thing. So it's, you know, that story might present an image of a divided society, people with or against Rubiales, but that really isn't the case. The overwhelming weight of public opinion is against him and most want him out. You can see that in the online surveys in a wide range of publications here in Spain. One of them, Mundo Deportivo, which is a Spanish sports daily, which has a mainly male readership. The numbers are up around 80% of people who want Rubiales to be removed.
Sounds like the majority of public opinion is in support of Jenny Hermoso. Coaches and players continuing to show solidarity with her too, including at a match that she went to last night.
Yes, exactly. It was the first time she's appeared in public since this ordeal has gone global. She was at a game between Atletico Madrid and AC Milan. It was a Women's Cup game. Right before the match, Atletico Madrid unfurled a huge banner saying "Contigo, Jennifer Hermoso," which means "We're with you, Jennifer." One of the players also had Jennifer's number 10 Spain shirt as they took the pre-match photo. Elsewhere, we've seen a deluge of support for Hermoso around the world of football, particularly Iker Casillas called Rubiales an embarrassment. We saw Hector Bellerin. He said that Rubiales is a narcissist playing the victim. We also heard Alex Morgan, the USA star, talk about how she was disgusted by the way Hermoso has been treated, and that Spain's World Cup win has been overshadowed by misogyny. Now, we also heard from Diego Simeone, the Atletico Madrid coach. We're outside the stadium right now. He said that he wanted to lend his voice to what he says is the 80 to 90% of Spanish society that is against Rubiales and what he's come to stand for. This is what he said.
Well, a week after it happened, a lot of people have spoken, and I want to join to what 80–90% of the society thinks. It was an incorrect behaviour for a president of a federation, and the image it has given outside Spain. And it's a shame that all the good things that the women did at the World Cup and that were really exciting were forgotten, and obviously we've spent all week talking about this topic. And we've obviously put aside how great, how magnificent they've been and what they've achieved globally.
And that's definitely the saddest part about all of this, that we're not talking about this incredible group of women and their amazing achievement winning Spain's first ever World Cup, Women's World Cup trophy. You know, we should be talking about them and not him. But hopefully, tomorrow, we're going to see the beginning of a change, not just in Spanish football, but in Spanish wider society.
At least one person has died and 57 others are injured after two explosions at a liquefied petroleum gas station near the Romanian capital, Bucharest. Most of the injured were firefighters who were putting out the first blaze when the second explosion happened. Authorities ordered the evacuation of all buildings in a 700-metre radius of the site. An investigation has been launched. The United Nations estimates nearly 9,000 people have been displaced in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, after a fresh outbreak of gang violence. Hundreds are seeking shelter in tents at a sports centre. This week, Kenyan delegates met with the country's unelected Prime Minister Ariel Henry and police chiefs to discuss providing international security against the worsening violence. In the United States, an armed white man has killed 3 black people at a store in Jacksonville in Florida in what police have described as a racially motivated attack. The local sheriff said the shooter then turned the gun on himself. He's believed to have been acting alone. Police say he had written several manifestos describing his hatred for black people. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. After Maui's devastating wildfires, its people turned to tradition to help them recover and rebuild.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
This week on Razor, as nature's engineers restore wetlands, they also restore habitats for other animals and plants, as well as reduce the risk of flooding.
It's worth noting, Guy, the dynamics of the dam here, really interesting. You've got fairly vertical front face, and then the back edge of the dam tapers back down, and they'll push sediment and stones, anything they can get really into the back of that.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. A bid to resolve conflict over competition. The US Commerce Secretary arrives in Beijing as trade tensions boil. 3 US Marines are killed and 5 others injured as their aircraft crashes during military exercises off the coast of northern Australia. And football teams and fans show support for Spain's Jenny Hermoso as the Football Association calls an urgent meeting over Luis Rubiales' behaviour. A brush fire on the Hawaiian island of Maui prompted authorities to briefly evacuate residents from Lahaina, just a few kilometres from the site recently ravaged by deadly wildfires. Firefighters have since brought it under control. At least 115 people were killed in the fires earlier this month, and hundreds are still unaccounted for. But, as our correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports, the community is turning to tradition to help with the recovery process.
On a hill above the scorched town of Lahaina, Kylie Adolfo and her nephew have planted a tree. An ulu, or breadfruit sapling, a species native to these remote Pacific islands. They hope it will become a symbol of resilience as the town looks to the future.
This represents our ancestors from the past. The ulu tree is very significant. It brings light. It represents strength. It'll drop the roots and hopefully it'll stay here and continue to grow as a symbol of what was and what is to be.
Following this tragedy, the community is searching for strength in its roots. Hawaii's Polynesian indigenous people first arrived on these remote islands more than 1,600 years ago. And in the wake of this disaster, it's that ancient culture of close-knit community and philosophical tradition that they now hope will lead the healing process. Near her young ulu tree, Kylie's community has erected an ahu, a traditional Hawaiian altar laden with the natural elements needed for recovery.
This water was harvested from Ka'ua'ula stream. We're hoping that the stream will run to its fullest capacity so that it may heal the land and heal the people here in Lahaina. Water is life, and that is true for any culture. With water, it's a new beginning.
Tradition here also values community connection. Tamara Paltin is a Maui County Council member who says that solidarity has been critical in the disaster response so far.
The community response is the main response. You know, we were able to mobilize through our own personal relationships, our own personal resources, and it's through our connections and our relationships with our families across the Pai'aina, the state of Hawaii, that we're able to provide for the people on the inside that were cut off from the outside for a long time.
Scanning flowers. As Lahaina's residents begin the long road to recovery, they're leaning on their strong bonds of culture and community to stay hopeful for the future.
We can still rebuild, and we'll rebuild it the Pono way, the right way.
Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Lahaina, Hawaii.
It's the final day of competition at the World Athletic Championships in Budapest. The event's seen more than 2,000 of the world's top athletes vying for the gold, silver and bronze. Let's talk to our correspondent, Peter Oliver, who's in Budapest. So, Peter, there's been another medal for one of the greats of Chinese athletics.
Not just one of the greats of Chinese athletics, but she will really go down as one of the greats of athletics in general, particularly the field events. That's women's shot putter, China's Gong Lijiao. She picked up an 8th consecutive medal at the World Championships last night in the women's shot put. She took bronze in that event. She becomes the first ever athlete to win at 8 consecutive World Championships. She's competing in her 9th consecutive World Championships. Now, we'll run through those. She has 2 golds, 2 silvers, and now 4 bronzes. I spoke to her just after she came off the field last night, and she said she's going to go for a little while longer yet.
This is my 9th time competing in the World Athletics Championships and my 8th medal. I'll come again for the next championship and hope I can get another medal, gold if I can. And I believe I can do better in the upcoming Asian Games in Hangzhou. It'll be my 4th Asian Games. I hope I can perform well.
About 40 minutes' time, and Gong Lijiao will be getting her bronze medal alongside Chase Ely of the United States, who picked up gold, and Sarah Mitten of Canada, who took silver.
So no more Team China athletes to compete, but still plenty of golds up for grabs.
Absolutely, still in a whole lot more to go. You can see crowds thronging in behind me. There's about 2 hours to go before the action gets underway here in Budapest on the final day. A lot to get through. We're looking at the women's high jump, the men's javelin, the men's 5,000 metres, the women's 800 metres, the women's 3,000 metres steeplechase, and a men's and women's 4x400 metre relay. I've got a sweat on just reading those out. There is plenty of action still left to come. I can tell you that you cannot get a ticket for love nor money for tonight's action either. There's people walking around all over the place asking if anybody has any spare tickets. It's going to be a packed house.
Peter, thank you very much. My correspondent Peter Oliver in Budapest. Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa has been re-elected for a second term. The Electoral Commission said the 80-year-old received more than 52% of the vote, while his main challenger, Nelson Chamisa, got 44%. Mnangagwa's ruling ZANU-PF party has also retained its parliamentary majority. The opposition has rejected the results with accusations of vote rigging and voter suppression. Japan's Environment Ministry says tests of seawater near the Fukushima nuclear plant have not detected any radioactivity. It comes days after authorities started releasing treated water into the ocean, despite protests and concerns from neighbouring countries, in particular China. More than 60,000 people in Japan have signed a petition calling on the government to halt the release. China placed a blanket ban on Japanese seafood imports after that release of the treated wastewater. Now, fish markets and sushi restaurants are having to find alternative sources. Our correspondent Huang Fei reports.
Feng Changhao and her husband have been selling seafood at the Huangshan market for over 20 years. All of their catch comes from the coastal waters of Guangdong province. It will be months before Fukushima's wastewater is estimated to reach Chinese shores. Some international experts have said the environmental impact is negligible. But Feng is still worried about the future of her trade.
We buy from fishing boats, so we know them well. Many of them have fished for generations. The ocean is their livelihood. How will they survive if the ocean is polluted? They can't just switch careers. What will they even do?
This is the largest wholesale market for fresh seafood and aquatic products in China. Scallops were among a small fraction of goods imported from Japan. On the day the import ban kicked in, market operators conducted a search and told vendors not to drive up prices amid fears of a supply disruption.
Just days into the South China Sea fishing season, the Huangshan market offers plenty of fresh catch in the region. The shops are, as you can see, as busy as ever. In fact, a lot of people tell us they're here to stock up on seafood before they become too dangerous to consume.
I'd be too scared to eat seafood in the future. We'll have to wait for a few years to see if the fish will mutate. I'm here to feast myself and my children before it's too late.
Across Guangzhou, Japanese restaurants are not waiting. This sushi chain says it's long invested in international sourcing, especially from Norway and the Americas. The chain's brand manager, who only wished to speak in a voice recording, said it has replaced Japanese ingredients on the entire menu.
Once Japan announced their plan in March, we had already stopped importing from the country. By August, none of our outlets used Japanese ingredients. That includes aquatic products, meat, and even sauces.
Sourcing globally does push up costs, but the company promised it will do its best not to pass them on to customers. The import ban appears to have sparked an interest in domestic farms. Shares of several aquatic farms surged following the announcement on Thursday. But with the conveyor belt of Fukushima's discharge already in motion, some sashimi lovers are resigned to the idea that their food may never be the same.
Even if you avoid radiation from seafood, you can't avoid it from everything else. Eventually, the entire world will be affected, but we still gotta eat.
CGTN, Guangzhou.
The last few months have seen record-breaking temperatures across the globe. In some parts of the United States, it was above 40 degrees Celsius for weeks on end. And the heat's not just bad for the human body. Researchers say it's bad for the mind too, with society's most vulnerable facing the highest risk. Our correspondent Tony Waterman reports.
The Sunrise Community Church bills itself as the weirdest little church in Texas. But among Austin's homeless community, it's a place they know they can always get a meal. Organizers say some 300 people come every weekday. On the day we visited, temperatures hit 43 degrees Celsius. The asphalt hotter than 71.
This one gentleman I hadn't seen before came to us. He was elderly, and his soles of his sneakers had melted into his socks. And it was just, I think, moments before his socks melted into his skin.
At least I'm trying, you know.
Besides the physical agony, Pastor Mark Hilbeling says the excessive heat is also taking a mental toll.
I think psychologically is actually where you see the biggest impact of climate change, because I think just like you and I, when we get to the end of September, it's not necessarily that it's hotter than it was in June, but psychologically it feels more draining.
Paul Esquidil knows what that's like firsthand. He's been living in a tent for the past 6 years. A tent, he says, that has now become a hot box.
Your mind just goes crazy. I've never been in war, but you feel like you have. Like you're fighting the weather. You're going to a war. It's only you. You gotta get ready, be prepared.
Research on the effects of long-term exposure to extreme heat is still in the early stages, but accumulating evidence shows it is linked to an increase in violence, aggression, psychiatric hospitalizations, even suicide.
So you can't deal with your own emotions perhaps as calmly as you could if you were cooler. And so when you start getting too hot, at some very basic instinctive level, you're fighting to keep yourself alive.
Repeat exposure to extreme weather can be particularly detrimental to the nearly 600,000 homeless people in the U.S., 20% of whom are already suffering from a serious mental illness, according to the National Alliance on Mental Health. Making matters worse, research has shown that psychoactive drugs may make people more vulnerable to the heat.
We see increased rates of kind of mortality among people who have previous mental health conditions when they're in hot conditions.
For Paul Esquidil, climate change is now an inescapable enemy.
And when that summer's over, that game's over. Now we got to play the next game. That's the winter game. It's a game, and you have to be good at it. If you're not good at it, it's going to take over your mind.
Scientists say the intensity, frequency, and duration of this year's summer heat are just a snapshot of the future. And while more research is needed to understand the relationship between extreme heat and mental well-being, one thing is already clear. Climate change is impacting not just our environments, but our minds as well. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
And finally, the festival spirit is sweeping London as thousands gather for the annual Notting Hill Carnival. The 55-year-old event, known for its music, food and incredible costumes, celebrates Caribbean culture. One of the longest-running street parties in the world. It goes on for 3 days and up to 2 million people join in each year. Sunday is Children's Day, and as children often do, they stole the show in a blaze of colour, music and all-round style. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.